Hi. Welcome to Women Who Build, the podcast where we sit down with the women who are doing the real work of building companies, teams, cultures, and careers. Today's guest has spent a career doing something most people only talk about, building people functions that actually hold. She scaled Square, which is now Block, from 200 to 2,000 employees. She's led talent and culture through some of the most intense periods in fintech, intense growth periods in fintech. And right now, as VP of People and Talent at DriveWealth, she's in the middle of laying the infrastructure that will support a company with a global footprint and serious ambitions. But what I find most compelling about Saqi is not just the scale of what she's built, it's the intentionality behind it, the programs she's created, the community she's invested in, and the way she approaches talent acquisition, not as a numbers game, but as a craft. Saqi, welcome to Women Who Build. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here as well.
Thank you. And look, before we get into the work you've done, I just want to go back to the beginning and take you there. What drew you into people and talent in the first place?
Yeah, it's funny, as many of us budding people and talent professionals, sometimes it's all through happy accidents. In my case, I started off as a career coach and counselor in higher education, and I would see all of these employers come in during career fairs and seemed really dynamic. And I was like, let me just try and give it a shot. And so first started off in tech many, many moons ago, doing at first university recruiting, leveraging a lot of my relationships with students to then hire. And then through that landed in recruiting and now more on like the HR VP side and talent experience, but just really love all things people, talent, and helping to build community, which I know is a big theme in my own career and passion.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, what did you think the job was going to be when you got into it, and how did that change once you actually got into it?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if I really had a thought out game plan. I think it was really more just I love the idea of like hiring and helping to scale and build teams. But over time, I realized that it's not so much just a support function. It's not just, hey, we have X number of positions, please go hire against them. But you're really helping to define what a culture looks like, to bring in future leaders in technology. And so it became a really rewarding, like self fulfilling cycle. A lot of times we say we help people in their inspire to retire kind of trajectory. And so I like to, be part of all of the different touch points. So I would say it's really been an evolution from pure support to really being a core kind of part and accelerator of the
Yeah,
business.
yeah, I hear you. It's a strategic function, not a support one, right? And more than just process for sure. You were at Square during one of the most intense periods in tech, 200 to 2,000 employees. What was that actually like to live through for you?
It was a really incredible time. Prior to Square, I'd never worked in startup environments. I'd only been at like tens of thousands wide organizations. And so it was really that intersection of startup mentality and working for a phenomenal founder, Jack Dorsey. He had started Twitter. Square was his next big venture. And so none of us fully knew what that was going to look like. But I just knew if I didn't try it then, I'd always regret it. And it really did change my life in a number of ways. And being able to really see entrepreneurship up close in that intersection of social good and tech was amazing. And so, really helping to build out infrastructure and grow a company to that size to then have a global footprint. Just even now, I live in New York and I go to a coffee shop or a maker's market and I see people using Square even on their own phones.
Yeah.
And it just makes me so happy around helping economic empowerment to.
Awesome. Well, look, what actually broke along the way for you, though? There must be something, there must be things that you had to build overnight in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, hiring certainly was our number one priority. We just really needed to bring in primarily a lot of engineers. And I would say being really intentional about not only hiring people who were technically very competent. At the time, we were kind of going up against all the big FANG companies, but really thinking carefully about what that bar raiser program was going to look like. So that I would say could be the first thing to break if you're not intentional about your North Star and what are the values that our employees are coming in with as well.
Nice. And you mentioned being intentional, and that's North Star. How do you actually stay intentional when you're growing that fast?
I think having an EVP, employee value proposition, is really important. And at Square, we literally had like the four corners, as we call them. So, start things small, act like an owner, give it soul, good ideas can come from anywhere. Those are some of the core tenets. And so anytime we were interviewing candidates, anytime we were doing performance reviews, had an engagement survey, we always wanted to map back to those core values. So whether I'm about to start a new job or I'm standing here, 5, 10 years in, I still know what I need to kind of drive to. So I think it's really important to just remind folks, right, what that looks like. It's like any other campaign. And I think it's really critical.
Yeah, for sure. Tying everything back to the core values and figuring out what those actually are is going to make a huge difference. And I want to link that to the actual work that you did following on from getting those values right, just the specific things you've done to build talent pipeline. Because I think there's such a big difference between companies who talk about talent acquisition and people who actually engineer it. And you're certainly in the second camp. So let's talk about recruiting events to start off with. I know you've been tapping into community events and joint events as a talent pipeline for many years, and I'd love to know how that started and what you learned about what makes a recruiting event actually worth doing versus just being a presence somewhere.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think when it comes to events, it's kind of a two-pronged intentionality. The first is certainly we have X number of open roles and we're looking to bring in talent and have live conversations with them, hopefully inspire them to then pursue a role at the company. But the second is really just proliferating, the mission, the values, the company itself, whether
Mm.
any candidate walks in as a potential candidate, but also a customer, an owner, a future client. I always want to think about people in terms of that entire ecosystem. So bringing them to us, unfortunately, we had wonderful spaces, whether it was in SF or New York, where we could come and they could learn from our CTO, our other product owners, anyone really, in terms of having a live conversation. We usually did like lightning round tech talks. We would bring a Square merchant to talk about their experience as an end user. It was really important as well. So I think thinking about those touch points, building community, but also certainly treating it as a pipeline to recruiting.
How do you convert that event presence into pipeline? Like, what's the follow through that teams miss? I know even as recruiters, we can be guilty of missing the follow up sometimes. We'll do that initial work and it might go nowhere else. So, how do you actually put that into a cadence? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether it's having a CRM or utilizing your ATS to make sure you're really tagging or creating unique links so that we can tie back the source to those events in order to follow up with those candidates is really,
Mm.
really important. So whether it was having an event and then maybe 3 months later, there's a tech week or a conference or any other initiative where we could tie it back. Hey, it was so great to meet you. Did you know, A, that we now have these roles open? Did you come back to our career site? Did you have a follow-up conversation? And all of our Square employees, or Squares as we call them, that would attend, we always wanted them, if they had like formed a good relationship or connection with someone, that they would keep that going. So some of it is for immediate hiring, but also I think it's really important to have a longer term pipeline because you never know which roles can open up, who can be interested down the road. And we've had instances of people joining maybe a year later, right? So it wasn't an
Yeah.
immediate ROI, but how do you think about that in terms of that connectivity over time?
Yeah, for sure. And perhaps, I don't know how much of that you automate and how much of that you try and keep, human on the front line. I'd love to know more about the sponsorship program you've built. What is it? How does it work? What has it done for your talent pipeline and your retention as well?
Sure. So sponsorship, I would say, is more of an internal kind of HR initiative. And the way I like to delineate it is mentors, which I think a lot of people hear about. A mentor is someone who speaks with you, and a sponsor is someone who
Mm.
speaks about you in rooms that you currently don't have or may not have access to. So
Yeah.
usually it's more from an executive level. So a few jobs ago, we decided to pilot a smaller cohort for a sponsorship program. So we looked at performance reviews and feedback. We had what we called a 9 box. And so we looked at folks who were in kind of like the 8 and 9 category. So very high potential folks. And then we paired everyone, around 20 people in this initial cohort, with an executive internally. So they had a cadence of meeting, I'd say bi-weekly, just to talk about their goals and, how they could help to further them along and really, again, advocate for them in rooms that they might not have access to. And then externally, we paired them with a career coach. And so we utilize a platform called Sounding Board. So this was completely outside of work where people can put in, it's still, tied to goals and things you want to accomplish at the company, but you had a neutral party to listen to. And so at the end of that 6 months, we would still monthly do programs internally with the cohort. We were a global company, so we paired people intentionally across different time zones, across different teams, and wanted to really advocate to create a mini community. And it wasn't a promise of a promotion, but we found within a year of conclusion of that initial cohort, around 75% to 80% of our folks were promoted. So it was a
Wow.
really wonderful program and a great kind of marketing tool internally where other people heard
Yeah.
about it and got really excited to join.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I noticed that you've run a code camp initiative as well. So I'd love to hear about that. What was the goal? Who did you target? What happened as a result?
Yeah, so Code Camp was an initiative we started at Square. So that was really to inspire future leaders in technology. And so that was oriented largely around women in tech. So through a very short application process, if someone was a student in North America, they could apply. They didn't have to be a CS or math major or anything. And then we had a committee internally. We selected 20 women as a cohort, and then we brought them for a week to San Francisco where they had a hack week project they had to work on, mentorship pairings, different 101s, whether it was like Ruby on Rails or Intro to Hardware. And at the end of that week, they actually presented out to the company during our town hall, just in terms of things that they learned and a little bit more about their Hack Week project. But honestly, it was really inspirational. It wasn't with the goal of hiring. However, we may have hired maybe one person out of each cohort, but we replicated it over time. And then anytime someone finished the program, they went into what we called Code Camp Alumni. It was a Facebook group and it became hundreds of women strong. And then over time, that was over a decade ago, those women are now leaders in their own right. And it was just such a wonderful way to introduce them to careers in technology, to see
Yeah.
kind of, get a behind the scenes view. And now they can advocate for the company and kind of pay it forward as well.
That is genius, if you don't mind me saying. And I think I really like the idea of the alumni Facebook group as well. I mean, you also were connected to the Boston to Harvard Women in Coding pipeline, and that started early, didn't it, in 2014 that you start getting connected to them. That's over a whole decade of showing up for the same community. How's that long-term relationship shaped the way you think about early stage talent acquisition and pipeline building?
Yeah. What's so outside of the inspirational nature of programs like that, and just to explain, this is called Harvard We Code Women Who Code, and it's the largest student-run female organization in the world. And so it's now expanded globally. And so this last February, when I attended, I met women from Malaysia, from Australia, from Europe, like literally all over the globe, which is incredible. When I see the trajectory and when I look at the data of leaders, or I should say, like interns, for example, if you hire them and then you convert them to full time, they tend to stay longer at the company compared to anyone from industry because you are helping to launch their career, you're giving them the foundations, and you're really giving them the tools and essentials along the way. So, from a data standpoint, it does show that from TA, you get a longer tenure. B, I think it's just really important to invest, not just to say like we support different communities in all of their forms, but to actually show up year over year, bring your engineers. I would always bring a cohort of folks. And it was just, we tried to always speak on panels or do other, tours or engagements and even just take women out to dinner just to be able to talk to them in whatever form. And now I see, for example, the CEO and founder of Alta, which is like a fashion forward startup tech company that's been featured in Forbes and Vogue. She was someone that I met at the conference. Just so
Really?
incredible to see.
That is incredible. And you're launching an AI intern program as well, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. So traditional internship programs are usually kind of an exploratory period that's mapped to a manager and you're tied to a specific team. Frankly, because our team here, our people team is relatively new, we had a short amount of time to launch an internship program. So we thought instead of doing that, which typically has about a 9-month lead time, even for a small cohort to launch, we decided to make it AI forward. First of all, just embracing, kind of our new world of technology. DriveWealth, the company that I'm currently at, they're very progressive when it comes to AI and our initiatives. This is all the way from our CEO, CIO, all the way down. So we decided why not hire AI interns to be tied to business outcomes directly. So whether it's automating a tool or pitching something around a project or having specific intel that you can utilize and make your jobs faster with AI. Let's kind of pilot that out. So we're testing that out between engineering, product, and brokerage this summer with the intention to convert. And so we're going to have 10 folks here and couldn't be more excited.
Fantastic. I guess my question would be across all of these amazing initiatives that you've run, is there any of them that surprised you the most in terms of its impact?
Yeah, I think the sponsorship program is one that I would point back to just because
Yeah.
we certainly knew that this was for high potential individuals and this was a lever to help them kind of accelerate their careers or just to know that we support them in their journey. We recognize them as high potential. However, I think the larger term impact, for example, my mentor, who I was fortunate to be a recipient of that program, I still text her to this day. So I think it
Wow.
went way beyond the time that we both, were at the company and worked together. And that's indicative of so many people that were there, not only with one another, the cohort, but with our executives, people that sometimes you see kind of all the way up here, right? And you feel like, well, they're not as accessible or at the end of the day, I think just remembering that we're all human and we are all here with like the same
Yeah.
intentionality when you're at the same company. And so, how do you kind of break down those silos and to ultimately be what sometimes is hard to see is really incredible.
For sure, for sure. And I guess following on from that, I just want to bring you to where you are right now, because I think what you're building at Drive Wealth is genuinely so interesting. And this is the infrastructure phase that most companies rush past and then regret. So, what does infrastructure phase actually mean to you? And how do you make the case for foundational investment to a leadership team that wants results immediately?
Yeah. Drive is such an interesting inflection point. We're around 330 employees. And so we have a very large global footprint. And in terms of our people and talent team, our chief people officer, Emily Shardak, is phenomenal. And so she really wanted to make an investment for us to build out, our tech tools and AI and really looking at how we can support our employees in order for them to run, all of their desks and very, very busy day jobs, basically. And so, really making that case for not, for example, we don't currently have a recruiting team, but like I'm enabled to be able to help run
Yeah.
that into HRBP work where I support our CTO. But around the board, I think it's around engagement. It's certainly around recruiting and it's around making sure we have that infrastructure and tech in order for us to potentially be an IPO ready company, right? And potentially
Yeah.
file an S1. So I think everything is looking at, again, how to be an accelerator to the business, not just a support function, not just here for hiring and to support onboarding and terms and whatnot, but really to say what else can we do, right? AI is a perfect example in order to really accelerate and make sure we're meeting our revenue goals for the year as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how do you think you change your approach to TA and culture when you're working with a company that has partners that are being signed across the globe, a true global footprint?
Yeah. I think it's really, really important to look at teams and kind of the makeup of that as well, right? I think we're so reactive sometimes to, okay, there's a position, let's do an intake with the hiring manager, let's go and look at specifications and do all the things, right, that we're so used to in TA. But to really look at things like attrition data or look at like what percentage turnover has there potentially been? When has your cycles been the heaviest in terms of your workload? Really look at the makeup of the team and what gaps or potential there are, even internally for people to move or transfer, transition before
Mm.
we look at filling externally. So I think really that partnership with the HRBP and the talent acquisition partner are really important. I'll be honest, in past lives, I don't necessarily think that was like as deep of a connection, but now from the purview that I have, it's something that I certainly am prioritizing as we're looking to build out our recruiting team here.
You're trying to, well, you want to put DriveWealth in the market as an employer of choice. So, how do you also empower managers internally to keep carrying the culture at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of times, especially at tech companies or tech forward companies, we enable a lot of managers, we elevate from within, which I think is phenomenal. But we also want to make sure we give them the tools and infrastructure that they need in order to be a good steward, right? And you are setting the tone as a leader. So just really manager enablement, I think is really, really critical, right? Giving people the tools, whether it is around, for example, we're going through a titling and job framework exercise right now. And so it's really to create parity across the company so that we can create a compensation structure so that everyone at the company understands this is the level that I'm at. This is what it takes for me to get to the next phase in my career. If I'm an IC, I don't necessarily have to go to manager in order to be successful. So I think it's really providing people with the context and the why behind it, and not just saying we're going to roll out a new program or here's an engagement survey. If we're sending that out, which is also something that we're doing this week, it's to say your voice matters, and we wanted to make sure that your management team is really set up to help you succeed. So what do you need from us in order for us to enable that for you?
Amazing. I mean, you're building out salary reviews, performance management, a culture committee, navigating a 4-day return to office all at once. I mean, where do you think most companies get these things wrong or find these things difficult? And what can be done differently? What are you doing differently?
I think I've learned over time, and this particularly is pertinent for when I was at a global company, in that meeting a business where they're at is really, really crucial. So, for example, when I was at a previous company where we had a global footprint, we were US headquarters, but we had offices in APAC and EMEA, LATAM. And I think we unintentionally embodied, again, a very US way of thinking. And that doesn't always work, right? We have to understand that in certain cultures, it's not okay to voice, an opinion right away, or to say like something's on fire, we need help. It's like it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, until it's not. And so I think it's really important to just gauge, whether it's a fully US based company, whether it has a global footprint, what is that current makeup? How do you enable people in order to, we say a lot about being their authentic selves, but in order for them to feel like they have a brave space, right? That they can like raise their voices, they can vocalize what's important to them. And so I would say all of those things in tandem, are really critical.
Yeah, nice. And I want to talk now more about how you shape that culture at a company level, specifically the AI work, because I think that's where DriveWealth is doing something that a lot of companies are still figuring out. I guess DriveWealth's 2026 goals really center on delivering for customers, AI and delivery, and being a forward-thinking company, if that's right. How do you take these company level goals and translate them into something that people actually feel in their day to day?
Yeah. So we are very diligent about having goals and goal setting across the company. Most places I've been at, we have quarterly goals that you just, queue through queue, and then you're reviewing, doing a red, yellow, green exercise. Here at DriveWealth, we actually have 20 goals. So back in January, we actually set them for the whole year, which is a big task to do, right? When you're starting a new year. But I bring this up because every goal that we did input, we mapped to one of our overarching kind of buckets, if you will, whether it's growth or innovation or delivery or delighting our customers or partners. So I think it's really important to think back to like, how are we mapping this? This is not just my silo, because I think a lot of times it's like we get so heads down that we're not seeing the 10,000, foot view, and like, what are we actually kind of working towards? And whether it's as granular as, inputting our ATS to make sure our data is all compliant. What does that mean? Does that mean we're innovating? Does that mean we're delivering? Does that mean we're delighting our customers again and partners? So I think always having that, as we say, we like to put our chins up and really kind of think forward.
For sure. I mean, you've stood up at an AI committee and given teams access to tools like Claude and Gemini. What's the philosophy behind doing that? What do you think responsible AI enablement looks like inside a regulated fintech as well, for that matter?
I think it's so important to demystify a lot of what's happening, right? There's so much talk around AI. People are concerned that their jobs are going to be lost. People, I mean, companies like Block recently did lay off a significant portion of their employee base. So I do think it can create a level of just annoyingness and fear, frankly. And so I think embracing that has been so refreshing for us. So tactically, what we did, Insight Partners, which is our one of our investors, they actually held an accelerator program, and our CEO and CIO attended. And then they brought back those learnings. Our CEO has a monthly newsletter where she actually broke down what the event was and kind of some of the key learnings there. And then one of our town halls was solely dedicated to AI usage. And so they actually broke down use cases, talked through Gemini, for example, and creating gems and agents and how we can use that, whether we want to map out a potential like international strategy plan, or whether you need to solve something for engineering, whatever the case may be. I know that I've been using it a ton. For example, we have a Lithuania office. And so when we're talking about expansion and how we can think about, translating some of our roles in the US to Lithuania, that's a great edge case for me personally, where I'm like, okay, let me utilize that. There's differences in currency, there's differences in employment laws and unions, and like, how do we think about all of these things from a TA perspective? HR has been really wonderful. So just to demystify it, to actually give people literally the tools, and then to educate them on how to use that as well. So kind of a three-pronged approach, if you will.
Nice, nice. And look, I want to step back from the corporate story for a moment because there's a real thread running through everything that you've done. And I think it just deserves a minute for its own conversation. And that's community. And this community building aspect. And I just want to know, why you keep going back to these things. You went back to Boston to Harvard program since 2014, even in the middle of a major scaling moment at work. And what keeps you going back there?
That's a great question. I think we spend honestly a lot of time at work, right? A significant portion of our lives. And I think we need something to kind of keep us connected and engaged. I know right now, frankly, D&I in the US at least is a little bit under a spotlight, but I bring it back to community in the sense of people want to be seen and heard at the end of the day, right? And if there's ways that we can lean into that, whether it's attending a conference like We Code externally, I think it's great to kind of step out of your little bubble outside of work, attend something, talk about the company, and then you realize, like, oh my gosh, we are doing so much. And I've had this convo so many times with engineers where I'll, attend a career fair, an event, a conference, and it's like, oh yeah, like it's really just nice to take the time and to dedicate, right, to connecting with your team and whatnot. And so, yeah, I think community is not only work internally and how do you think about engagement and making sure people feel connected to one another, to the work, and breaking down silos. And when you feel like you can have a human to human conversation, then that helps with work too, right? Just understanding where each other is coming from. So investing in other communities in order to bring it back and to bring back those findings and to build internal communities is all kind of interconnected.
It is. And how would you talk about sponsorship versus mentorship? I know you mentioned they're two different things, but what is the difference and why does that matter?
Yeah, I think a mentorship a lot of times can be fairly organic, which is wonderful, right? You want to reach out to someone or have them as your mentor, and it can be formal, but it can also be just let's chat over coffee or lunch and just give you kind of tips or ways of the land and all of that. But sponsorship, I feel like, is more of like an actual program that's usually like a people and talent HR sponsored, where you're intentionally being paired with someone in order to help elevate your work. Whether it's, in my case, I was asked to present at town halls due to my sponsorship, my pairings, or whether it was to think more about strategy outside of like my day to day kind of bubble. I think ways to bring someone into another world and then elevate them up at the same time. You really need people at the leadership level, and just in terms of time dedicated to it, cost dedicated to it, if you're utilizing other platforms or getting coaches, which is really important too. I think that level of investment requires a more formalized program. So that's the difference.
Nice, thank you. And you've mentioned wanting to launch mentorship circles, so spaces for people to sit, reflect, share advice. I love the idea of that, but what's the vision and what gap are you really trying to fill that existing programs aren't doing at the moment?
Yeah, so a lot of companies, certainly I would say at DriveWealth, we had a really robust like health and benefits programs, and so I think expanding upon that. Frankly, May is also Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's about to come up. So we started to have conversations around how can we help support that. And I'll just mention candidly, I think for women, like we're much more open traditionally to being able to speak about that. For men, not so much, right? So how do we kind of make sure that, whether it's anxiety, it's OCD, it's mental health, it's cancer screenings in all of its forms, how do we really just kind of remove a little bit of that filter or like that fear again of like being able to speak up and really thinking about. So that's not exactly a mentorship circle, but when I say circle, I mean opportunities for people to kind of speak up and be open about things that traditionally they may not feel as comfortable kind of talking about. And it takes so many different forms. So it can be mentorship, but it can be something else.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we're sort of coming to the close of our chat now. And I want to end with some real honesty here. And let's talk about the things that didn't work. I feel like sometimes that is as effective as talking about things that did, and we can help others avoid pitfalls that we fall into. But what's the advice nobody gave you? Essentially, that's what we want to delve into. And that's where the real insight often lives. What's something that you tried, a program, a structure, an approach to talent acquisition that just did not work? And what did you learn from that?
When we were talking about Code Camp earlier at Square, phenomenal. It was just one of the most beloved programs that I would say not only there, but anywhere that people were a part of and experienced. I tried to replicate that at a future company way later, and it just didn't take off. People did not really, not that they didn't see the value, they
Interesting.
just couldn't justify putting that level of investment and time into it, given our company kind of roadmap and goals and trajectory. So it was certainly disappointing. I would say it didn't work in the sense it never even took off because it wasn't fully supported. So I think again, it goes back to really understanding like your company climate, what the culture is, what the P01s are, right, in terms of the roadmap and what can be supported. So you can't always take something and retrofit it to a future
Yeah.
place. And I would say on a personal standpoint, just acting like an owner, which I mentioned was one of our values, like truly, especially in tech companies when people have equity involved too, it's you're literally an owner at the company, and not only to see yourself within your little, trajectory or bubble or funnel or
Yeah.
vertical, right? To say like, hey, I also can say something about the product, or I had this piece of customer feedback when I spoke with someone outside of work. So when I was at Square, if I was outside talking, traveling, talking to merchants, I would always try to say, what's been your experience with our product? Is there anything I can bring back to our engineering or product teams, right? So just remembering that like you're not only an employee, you're an end user and an owner as well. And so just, always keeping that mindset, I think can be wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. And look, if you could go back now and give yourself one piece of advice, perhaps at the start of the Square scaling journey, for example, what would that
Yeah.
be?
Yeah, I think it's always really important. This is more maybe career trajectory is like not to put yourself in a box, right? I never thought I would ever be where I am today and I couldn't be happier about it. I don't really love like following your passion because I think that puts a lot of pressure to finding like one thing, but follow your curiosity because one thing leads to the next, leads to the next. And so kind of see what the through lines are and like just be open to different experiences. We're in a new world right now with AI, certainly. And just there's so much we call it an opportunity rich environment, so just having a growth mindset and just saying what can I lean into where I have natural inclinations or strengths, and you never know what that can lead to.
It reminds me of the Steve Jobs story about taking a calligraphy class. I don't know if you've seen that yet. And
No.
he had no idea why he was doing it at the time. He's just like, yeah, I really like this class that I'm doing at uni. And then there you go, all the fonts came from that. But look, for you, what's next, Saki? What does the next chapter look like, both at DriveWealth, in the broader conversation you want to be part of when, around women building tech and finance?
Yeah, such a great question. So I'm pretty new to DriveWealth. I just started in January, and we joke that it's like dog years. In some ways, it's been like 4 months, in other ways, like 5 years. But it's been wonderful. And really, I just want to plug into our community internally. I support our CTO and our entire tech and product organization. And so just making sure that we are building and scaling teams, right, that can really support our product roadmap and everything that we need to deliver on, and really just like leaning in. And again, how can I help to accelerate the business in addition to a people and talent kind of function? And beyond that, I'm relatively, I should say, I moved back into New York. I used to live here a number of years ago. So plugging into the tech community, especially like the women in tech community. I believe there's New York Tech Week coming up in June, and just seeing what else, there is for whether it's DriveWealth or it's myself personally to plug into, I think would be wonderful. It's such a supportive community. And so however I can also pay it forward, like I'm happy to.
Thank you. And Saki, this has been such a rich conversation. I really appreciate you being this open with the mechanics of everything you've built. And for anyone listening who's in the middle of building a team or a people function, scaling, or just trying to figure out how to attract the right talent without a massive budget, I hope this gave you a blueprint or at least a starting point. Saki, where can people find you if they want to follow your work or reach out?
So I'm the only Saqi Mehta that I know. So I'm on LinkedIn. I That's probably the primary place, and yeah, happy to connect with people there.
Perfect. And if you're not already part of the Women Who Build community, this is your invitation. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and come and find us on the Primis Talent LinkedIn page, Instagram, or catch us on the Primis Presents YouTube channel. We build in public, we build together, and we're just getting started. Thank you for listening.